They thought it was just an old box of yellowed papers forgotten in the attic of a collapsing house in rural Kansas. But as the brittle envelopes were opened and the words spilled out, the air seemed to thicken. These weren't love letters, they were confessions, dark, feverish accounts of a secret pact between husband and wife that had remained hidden for over a century. The townspeople who first read them whispered only one phrase: "This should never have been found." If you want more untold stories like this, subscribe, hit the like button, and stay until the end, because what you're about to hear is not just disturbing history. It's a glimpse into the shadows of human desire that most would rather believe never existed. The story begins in the spring of 1910 in a quiet Kansas town not far from the border with Missouri. Back then, life moved slowly. Dirt roads wound between modest clapboard houses, trains screeched into the station twice a day, and church bells dictated the rhythm of weeks. Outwardly, it was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, where families grew old on the same porches their grandparents had built. Among the residents was a couple whose lives, at least to the outside world, seemed unremarkable. He was a man of steady work, respected if not particularly liked. She was known for her polite manners, always dressed modestly, with her hair pinned neatly under a wide-brimmed hat. They attended Sunday service, hosted dinners, and exchanged greetings with neighbors. To anyone watching, they were ordinary, even forgettable. But hidden behind their domestic facade was a secret that defied comprehension. That secret lay preserved in the letters that would one day shake the town's memory to its core. The letters weren't written in haste, they weren't the frantic scribbles of unstable minds. No, they were carefully composed, each one dated, sealed, and kept as though the words themselves held value beyond the act they described. In them, the couple shared fantasies that blurred the line between love and death. They wrote of bodies, lifeless, silent, and of the strange beauty they found in what others would call grotesque. The first letter began innocently enough, almost like a diary entry. "Dearest, I felt close to you tonight in a way I cannot put into words. The silence of the body speaks more than a living voice ever could." At first glance, one might mistake it for poetry. But as the pages continued, the meaning sharpened into something more literal, more horrifying. In another letter, she wrote, "I dreamt again of the stillness, of touching skin that does not resist, of lying beside you in that eternal quiet. It is our pact, and I wait for the day we no longer need to pretend." There were dozens of such letters, each revealing another step into obsession. And unlike many forbidden writings of the time, tales of romance, secret affairs, or political rebellion, these words were never meant to scandalize or entertain. They were promises, a private covenant sealed between two people who believed they had discovered a truth too dangerous for the world outside. When the letters surfaced decades later, bundled with string in a trunk discovered during the demolition of an abandoned farmhouse, the reaction was immediate. Local historians argued about their authenticity. Some claimed they were the work of a deranged forger. Others swore the handwriting matched property records from 1910, tying them directly to the couple whose names appeared in faded ink. But even as scholars debated, the content spoke for itself. No forgery could capture the intimacy of those words, the small details of daily life mixed with confessions of unspeakable acts. They described nights spent in graveyards, stolen moments among the dead, and a love that demanded not just flesh, but silence. What made the discovery even more chilling was the careful preservation. These were not scraps hidden in shame. They were cherished. Each envelope was numbered, catalogued, as if the couple intended for someone, someday, to read them. The attic where they were found had been locked for decades. The family who once lived there had long vanished from public memory. Their neighbors had passed on, their descendants scattered across states. Only the house remained, rotting slowly in the Kansas humidity until its boards sagged and the roof caved in. When workers entered to clear it out, they stumbled upon the trunk by accident. Inside were not only letters but also small objects, a dried flower pressed between pages, a ribbon stained with something dark, and a photograph that raised more questions than it answered. The photo showed the couple seated stiffly in front of their home, their expressions calm, almost content. Yet on the back of the image, in neat handwriting, was a single line: "In silence, we are eternal." From that moment, the town could never see its past the same way again. These were not strangers from a far-off land. They were their own people, neighbors, ancestors, perhaps even relatives, who had harbored desires most would call monstrous. And yet, the deeper one read into the letters, the more disturbing a thought emerged. They weren't alone. References appeared to meetings, to others who understood, to gatherings held in barns or behind closed doors. Were there more? Was this a hidden culture in the heart of early 20th century America, disguised beneath Sunday sermons and polite greetings? The answers lie in the next part of this story, as we peel back the ordinary life they displayed to the world, and uncover how two people, bound by a pact of love and death, managed to deceive an entire town for years. By daylight, they seemed like the perfect example of marital respectability. He worked at the rail depot, steady shifts, punctual, always seen with a pressed shirt and his cap tilted low. His job didn't make him rich, but it gave him something rarer in the early 20th century: stability. She was his mirror image in quietness. At church, she sat straight-backed in the pew, singing hymns softly, never raising her voice above what was proper. Neighbors remembered her as a woman who always had her gloves on. They lived in a modest two-story house at the edge of town, its white paint perpetually peeling from Kansas wind and dust. The porch was sagging even then, but the flower beds were tidy, and the curtains always drawn neatly in place. To the casual eye, nothing set them apart from the dozens of other couples trying to survive in small-town America during the 1910s. But the letters revealed a reality that clashed violently with the facade. Hidden between lines of mundane domestic chatter, weather complaints, grocery lists, notes about train schedules, were sentences that carried the weight of their private world. She wrote, "The hymns sound hollow when I know what waits for us after night falls. Every Sunday I sing for the living, but my heart longs for the silent choir beneath the soil." He replied, "I smiled at Deacon Miller today and thought only of how little he knows of us. Their world is loud, frantic, temporary. Ours is eternal. Let them rot in noise. We keep the quiet." The mixture of banality and obsession was unsettling. These weren't letters written in the frenzy of madness. They were deliberate, balanced, proof that the couple moved seamlessly between public duty and private transgression. Neighbors occasionally noted small oddities, though none seemed alarming at the time. The wife avoided direct sunlight, walking under a parasol even in winter. The husband was seen more than once returning home late, his boots muddied, though there had been no rain. One neighbor recalled hearing faint noises at night, like a hymn hummed low and slow, but assumed it was no more than the wife practicing songs for Sunday service. There was also their remarkable absence from gossip. In a town where everyone's business eventually became everyone's news, their lives were strangely untouched by rumor. They kept to themselves, declined invitations politely, and rarely traveled. In hindsight, that silence seems like a shield, as though they had perfected the art of blending in while holding their secrets close. One particularly chilling letter offered a glimpse into the mechanics of their pact. "We are bound not by chains but by understanding. To you I give my silence, my patience, and my part in the work. You are my companion in the garden where no voices rise. Promise me again that when the time comes, we will not hesitate." The garden was mentioned in multiple letters, though it remains unclear whether this was a metaphor or a literal place. Some historians suspect it referred to the local graveyard on the edge of town, where both of them were known to take evening walks. Others believe it may have been their own backyard, where rows of lilies masked freshly disturbed soil. For all their secrecy, fragments of their obsession seeped into everyday life. Shopkeepers noticed the husband's unusual purchases: extra candles, thick rope, large jars of lye. He always had an explanation, delivered calmly and convincingly, but together the pattern was unmistakable. And yet no one questioned them deeply. Perhaps it was the era when privacy was respected to a fault, when speaking out risked shame or retaliation. Perhaps it was because, to most, the couple seemed too quiet, too ordinary, to inspire suspicion. But the letters stripped away any illusion. They described evenings when the husband would leave under cover of darkness and return hours later, carrying gifts for his wife. They never wrote explicitly what these gifts were, but the implication is hard to miss. She responded with gratitude, sometimes comparing him to a messenger who brings me closer to eternity. One of the most unsettling revelations was the way they spoke of their marriage itself. To them, intimacy wasn't about children. They never had any. It wasn't about companionship in the conventional sense. It was about communion with silence, with death, with the forbidden. Their letters read like scripture of a faith they had built together, a religion of two. The world outside knew nothing of this. At church socials, they smiled politely. At the depot, he tipped his hat to passing ladies. When neighbors' children ran by their porch, she handed out small sweets with a gentle smile. It was only in ink, hidden under floorboards and packed away in trunks, that their true selves emerged. Decades later, when historians pieced together their story, one fact unsettled everyone: the couple's calm. There was no evidence of hesitation, no shame in their words. If anything, they seemed proud of what they shared, proud enough to document it carefully, as if ensuring that history would remember them not as ordinary people, but as pioneers of something unspeakable. The deeper the investigators read, the more disturbing details appeared. References to nights when the husband delivered to her, when she described lying beside what she called the eternal body. Whether this was poetic metaphor or literal confession, no one could say for certain. But the letters were clear on one point. They saw their actions as an act of love, not crime. And as unsettling as the content was, a darker question began to surface among those who studied the papers. How far had this gone? Were these merely fantasies written in secret, or had the couple actually crossed the threshold into deeds that could never be undone? The town would learn soon enough, because while the letters exposed their desires, it was the evidence outside the attic that suggested those desires were not confined to paper. The letters did not merely hint at obsession, they unfolded like a diary of deeds too grotesque to dismiss as fantasy. By the third bundle of envelopes, the tone had shifted. What began as longing and metaphor transformed into descriptions so precise, so rooted in physical reality, that denial was impossible. One letter, dated October 1910, read, "The earth was damp tonight. You carried him gently, as if laying down a child to rest. I held his hand, cold but still. When I closed my eyes, I felt the world go quiet, as though we had stolen something sacred. I am not afraid any more. I am grateful." Another followed weeks later. I waited as you said I should. The silence filled me until I thought I would drown in it. But when I touched his face, when I kissed the lips that could not resist, I felt more alive than in all my years. This is our truth. Do not let me forget it. The handwriting was steady. No smudges, no frantic scrawls, just calm confession. Each sentence was framed with affection, often closing with, "Forever yours in silence." The husband's replies were colder, more methodical. He wrote of digging, of timing, of watching lantern light fade as he worked in the graveyard's shadow. "They bury them shallow here," one letter observed. "By morning, no one will notice the ground has shifted. You will have what you need before the sun finds us." The chilling part was not only the content but the consistency. This wasn't a single lapse into madness, it was a pattern. Over months, possibly years, they documented their pact, building a private liturgy of desecration. And within those pages lay references that matched unsettling facts. Old burial records from the town cemetery noted disturbed soil, complaints of animals scattering bones, whispers among caretakers that graves seemed tampered with. At the time, these were dismissed as superstition or negligence, but in light of the letters, they read like corroboration. Neighbors later admitted to peculiar memories. Children swore they had seen lanterns glowing among the gravestones after midnight. One boy told his mother of hearing laughter near the cemetery fence, though no one believed him. A widow recalled encountering the wife in the graveyard at dusk, staring at a headstone with a faint smile, humming a lullaby. The most haunting piece of correspondence was written on black-edged stationery, the kind reserved for mourning. "You promised me eternity, and tonight you gave it." He was young, almost beautiful. His stillness was perfect, his hair soft as wheat in summer. "I lay beside him while you watched, and I knew then that love is not bound by breath. We have crossed over, and there is no returning." It was signed with her initials only, as though even the act of writing her full name felt too exposed. For decades, scholars debated whether these were confessions of real acts or elaborate role-play, a written theatre of depravity. But one discovery silenced most doubt. Pressed between two envelopes was a lock of hair, brittle with age, tied neatly with a thread. Testing in modern times confirmed it was human, belonging to someone no older than 15. The implications were devastating. If the letters told the truth, then the couple had not only broken social and religious taboos, they had committed crimes hidden beneath the cover of sanctity and silence. One historian who reviewed the documents described them as a scripture of perversion, written with the devotion of saints. Another called them the clearest window into the psychology of necrophilia ever uncovered in American history. What disturbed readers most was not the act itself, horrifying as it was, but the intimacy with which it was shared. These weren't the ravings of a lone deviant. They were the love letters of a married couple, united by choice. They encouraged one another, reassured one another, built a shared theology around their darkness. The wife wrote, "When I am gone, I pray you will give me the same gift. Do not bury me where others can find me. Keep us together. Promise me the garden will always be ours." The husband replied, "I promise, yours will not rot with strangers. You will be mine in silence, mine when the earth closes over, mine until the end." These lines transformed the discovery from shocking to unbearable. This wasn't just about what they had done, it was about what they had planned, a pact that would outlast life itself. Among the objects found with the letters was a small notebook, its pages blank except for one. Written across it, in a different hand, perhaps hers, was a single sentence. "Love is strongest when the heart has stopped." The letters stopped abruptly in 1912. No explanation, no farewell, just silence. And that silence raised the most chilling question of all. Had the pact been fulfilled? Did the husband eventually honor her wish, preserving her body in some hidden place? Or had the letters been buried with her, locked away in the attic as the last echo of a secret too dangerous to speak aloud? By the time the truth began to surface, the couple had long been buried, their graves marked with simple stones. But the discovery of the letters cast those stones in a different light. Were they genuine resting places or empty markers hiding a darker arrangement? As the town wrestled with these questions, suspicions spread, because if the couple had been capable of such acts, what else had gone unnoticed in those quiet Kansas streets? The story was no longer just about two people. It was about a community that had looked away, a society that had believed silence equaled safety. But silence was the very thing that allowed the horror to flourish. Kansas towns in the early 1910s were built on routine. Men worked, women kept house, children played until dusk. Any disruption, a missing cow, a broken fence, was quickly noticed and just as quickly explained. But in the years when the letters were being written, unease began to spread quietly, like smoke seeping under a door. It began with whispers in the cemetery. The caretaker, an old Civil War veteran named Samuel Green, told his wife more than once that he felt watched during his evening rounds. "Not by the dead," he said grimly, "but by someone who wanted to be among them." Graves looked disturbed, soil loosened when it should have been packed tight. He filed complaints to the church board, but nothing came of it. People assumed he was tired, or worse, drinking again. Then came the animals. Farmers found their hounds howling at the cemetery fence, their backs arched, refusing to enter. Cats vanished. A horse collapsed mysteriously after bolting near the graveyard, foam at its mouth as though it had seen something unbearable. None of these events pointed directly at the couple, but when neighbors saw lantern light moving near the cemetery after midnight, and when they realized whose home sat nearest its edge, doubts began to take shape. The wife, always pale, seemed to grow more spectral. Her cheeks hollowed, her eyes sunken, but not with illness, more with something like hunger. She spoke less at church socials, offering only curt nods before withdrawing. One woman recalled that during a funeral service, while others wept, the wife's lips curled into the faintest smile as the coffin was lowered. "It was as if she was greeting an old friend," the woman whispered years later. The husband remained steady, but his late-night absences drew comment. He told neighbors he was taking long walks to ease his lungs, troubled by coal dust from the depot. Few questioned him. Yet one autumn evening, a farmer claimed to see him dragging something heavy in a burlap sack toward the woods behind the cemetery. When asked, the husband dismissed it as firewood. But the farmer swore the shape was wrong, too human, too limp. Children, too, carried stories. They dared each other to peek through the couple's windows, swearing they saw shapes on the parlor floor covered in white sheets. A girl insisted she heard music, a lullaby hummed off-key long after midnight. Parents scolded them, called it childish nonsense, but children often sense what adults refuse to acknowledge. The church pastor eventually visited under the pretext of checking on the wife's health. He reported nothing unusual, just a quiet home, a pot of tea cooling on the stove. Yet even he admitted something unsettled him. "It was the smell," he said. "Not rot, not exactly, just wrong. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in the sun." The town, bound by politeness, never confronted the couple openly. That was the Kansas way: respect privacy, avoid scandal. But suspicion turned neighbors' glances sharper, their greetings shorter. Invitations to socials ceased, conversations hushed when the couple walked by. They must have noticed, yet the letters showed no sign of concern. If anything, they seemed to relish the isolation, as if rejection by the living pushed them closer to their private covenant. One particularly eerie note, found folded separately from the others, read, "They watch us now, but they do not see. They smell the lilies, but not the garden beneath. Let them look away as they always do. Silence protects us." By 1911, disappearances fed the whispers. A young drifter, last seen asking for work at the rail depot, vanished without trace. A teenage boy drowned in the river, or so it was said, though no body was ever recovered. A travelling salesman checked into the town's inn and never checked out. None of these cases were officially tied to the couple. But in the silence of porches and kitchens, names were spoken, eyes glanced toward their sagging house, and fears grew roots. The final straw for many came one stormy night when a bolt of lightning struck near the cemetery, igniting a tree. Locals rushed with buckets to fight the flames. In the chaos, two men swore they saw the wife standing among the graves, her nightgown soaked, her face upturned to the burning sky. When they called her name, she didn't flinch, just raised her hand slowly, as if in benediction, before vanishing into the dark. The next day she appeared in church as usual, dressed neatly, singing softly. No one dared ask her about it. But the damage was done. Trust was gone. The couple's names became warnings spoken to children. Don't wander too close to their house. Neighbors began locking their doors earlier. Farmers drove their wagons faster past the cemetery after sunset. And yet, nothing was ever proven. No sheriff's report, no arrests, just a growing sense that something unspeakable was happening in plain sight, protected by silence and politeness. It was not until decades later, when the letters emerged from the attic, that the town realized how much of their unease had been justified. Every suspicion, every whisper, every flicker of lantern light in the graveyard had been pointing to the truth all along. The letters were not imagination, they were confession. And the final pages held the darkest revelation of all, the end of the pact, sealed not just in words, but in death itself. The last bundle of letters, brittle and nearly falling apart, carried no dates. Unlike the others, these were not written back and forth, but seemed to come from a single hand, his. The ink was heavier, the lines shorter, as though written under strain. And they told the ending that the earlier pages had only foreshadowed. The first of these final notes read simply, "She asked, and I could not refuse." Historians would later argue whether the wife had fallen ill, whether she had chosen to hasten her end, or whether their pact had finally demanded its price. But, in his words, the act was framed not as murder, but as fulfillment. He described preparing her body carefully, laying her in the parlor as though for a private wake. He wrote of washing her hair, braiding it with the same ribbon that was later found in the trunk, still faintly stained. She smiled even in stillness, he wrote. I lay beside her as promised, and she was mine. Eternity began tonight. The following letters grew darker. He wrote of refusing to bury her immediately, of keeping her near, of lighting candles each night as he visited her. Days blurred into weeks. The tone shifted from devotion to obsession, then to despair. The neighbors notice. I hear their footsteps pause outside. They smell the lilies, they wonder. I cannot let them take her from me. One note, nearly illegible, ended with the words, I will join her soon. And then silence. The trunk held no more, no confession of what he finally did with her body, no account of his own end. But the objects inside suggested the conclusion. Alongside the ribbon and lock of hair lay a woman's brooch, cracked down the center, and a rosary missing half its beads. The photograph of the couple was there too, but someone, perhaps him, had drawn a faint cross over her face. When researchers compared burial records, they found something disturbing. The wife's official death date was listed in 1912, but no burial plot could be located under her name. Her stone was present in the cemetery, weathered but intact, yet when ground-penetrating scans were conducted decades later, they revealed only empty soil beneath, no coffin, no remains. As for the husband, his grave did contain bones, but they were never conclusively identified. Age and poor record-keeping blurred the truth. Some claimed the coffin had been tampered with, that bones from another grave had been substituted. Others believed he had been buried properly, but with his secret intact, his wife hidden elsewhere, in some forgotten corner of Kansas soil. The revelation shattered the town's silence. Newspapers picked up the story in the 1970s when the letters first came to light, branding it the Necrophiliac Pact of Kansas. Scholars dissected it, criminologists analyzed it, theologians condemned it. Yet even amid the horror, fascination grew. How had such acts unfolded in a place so ordinary, under the noses of neighbors, without anyone daring to intervene? The truth was simple and chilling. They hid behind the one shield society could never pierce: respectability. A quiet couple, polite, church-going, never making a fuss. The kind of people no one suspects until it's too late. For the descendants of the town, the discovery became a burden. Some denied it altogether, calling it a hoax meant to stain their history. Others accepted it with grim resignation, pointing to the eerie rumors that had lingered for generations. But the letters remained, undeniable in their intimacy. They were too detailed to dismiss, too sincere to fake. No forgery could replicate the consistency of their tone, the mingling of mundane chores with macabre devotion, the private shorthand of two lives intertwined in secrecy. One final note, written in his hand, lingered in the memory of everyone who read it. Do not mourn us. We found what others fear. We are whole now, in silence. The attic trunk was eventually sealed again, placed in archival storage. Only a handful of scholars were allowed to see the originals. Copies circulate quietly among criminologists, true crime researchers, and historians of the macabre. But the physical letters, stained and fragile, remain locked away. The story leaves more questions than answers. Where was her body? Did he truly end his own life? Or did he live on, hiding the secret until death finally forced it from him? Were they alone in their obsession, or were the hints about others who understood a clue to a wider circle that history has never uncovered? What is certain is this: the couple's love, if it can be called that, survived beyond the grave. It defied law, morality, and even death itself. And in doing so, it carved one of the darkest chapters into the hidden history of America. The people of that Kansas town would never look at their cemetery the same way again. Every grave became a question. Every shadow between the stones seemed to hold the echo of the pact. And for us, over a century later, the story serves as a reminder. Behind the neat curtains, behind the polite smiles and Sunday hymns, behind every ordinary facade, there may lie truths so grotesque, so unimaginable, that we turn away rather than face them. But the letters remain, whispering still, waiting for anyone willing to read them, to confront the silence they cherished. Because silence for them was never emptiness, it was eternity,